All right, folks, I'm jumping over to YouTube for a question. And this is from Everything Has a Handle Now. And the question is about, looks like interview coming up. So I'm currently in the second and final round of an interview for a 2 year traineeship. So it sounds pretty cool. The selection will be based on 15-minute interview rounds with 5 internal teams. Okay. Each team can choose who they want to have. So the teams will conduct these interviews for about 3 hours. So I was wondering if you were in the position of these team leaders, what would you look for? Considering the short time, my current plan is to just be myself and hope for the best. And then they said some extra information might not be needed, but I think extra information is always helpful if you're looking for more specific answers. I feel like it doesn't hurt. So extra info is that 8 spots will create a kind of trainee team. Okay, so that's interesting, right? So that actually is helpful. Consisting of 2 software engineers. I'm going for this: 2 test engineers, two embedded, and 2 extra. 30 candidates left. Okay, sorry, I was like, how does that math work? But there's 30 candidates to go through, and I know because I have the numbers in front of me. If it wasn't obvious, they're going for a software engineering position, and there's 2 slots. Now, when he says 30 candidates left, or he or she, sorry, I don't know if that's 30 software engineering candidates. I don't know if that's people going for these other roles. Um, but what's interesting is that there are 8 slots, and I do see test engineers. I do see embedded. I don't know what the difference is between embedded. Like, is it embedded software engineers? Because maybe that's still of interest. I'm making an assumption here they're not totally interested in the test engineer role. And 2 extra, I don't know what that means. Maybe it's like TBD, like it could be any of the above. So the way I read this is there's a team of 8, so there's 8 positions in total, and arguably up to 6 of those could be some type of software developer position and 2 are more test. But minimally, because I don't know from the details, minimally 2 are going to be software engineering. So um, interesting. I think this is a cool one to talk through. So I'll give my perspective. Obviously, when I go to answer this, I think this person knows like I am not the person in charge of that. So this is going to be purely my perspective. And I should mention before I jump into this, if you have questions you want answered, leave them in the comments. Happy to try my best. If you want to be anonymous and you want to write a lot more detail, feel free to message me. Dev Leader is the personal brand I use on all social media platforms, and that is my main YouTube channel. If you want to check that out for more edited, succinct videos and not just me rambling in a camera, usually driving around in a car. So, okay, I think it's going to be hard in a 15-minute interview for them to. I'm trying to think of like traditional interviews that I go into where you're going to have like coding questions, system design, behavioral interviews. I don't know. I'm assuming they've already kind of done this kind of stuff. And because they're saying I'm currently in the second and final round of an interview. So I'm assuming they've already done some of the technical stuff. And that assumption is going to frame up the rest of my sort of positioning around this. And just to clarify that, I would believe that's done because in 15 minutes, I don't think that that's something that anyone is going to be able to gauge effectively. So I think this is going to be mostly about behavioral interviews. Um, and with that said, my perspective is going to be that, like, as they kind of said, considering the short time, my current plan is just to be myself and hope for the best. So I don't think you necessarily need to hope for the best. I think you should hope, but I think your strategy is actually interesting here. So um, when we talk about behavioral interviews, like the one of the key things that I try to make sure that people understand is that behavioral interview questions are like there's a goal in mind when you're being asked questions. So I suspect you'll have more behavioral interview style questions in this. I also do think that on top of just what I might classify like as a behavioral interview question, you will probably have stuff that it's like people just want to see kind of like where your interests align. Um, I have another thought that I want to add on to this about the 30 candidates left and 8 people. So I'm saying this out loud so I can try to remember it as I keep blabbing away here. But yeah, I think this will primarily be focused on a couple things. Behavioral interview questions. There's not much time to get through a lot here. Um, Sort of like a team fit, which is slightly, it's still related to behavioral interview, but like, for example, if they're gauging kind of maybe your interests and some of your strengths in particular, some teams might say, like, hey, we really want this person. So let's assume, just to park it for a moment, let's assume that on the technical side, like anyone who's made it to this round has demonstrated their technical skills, okay? Whether that's coding, system design, whatever it is, right? They've demonstrated the technical skills. That's why people were able to move on. Now I think what's happening, if I'm putting myself in the perspective of what I believe is going on here, and if I'm on the recruiting side of this, it's, hey, we have 30 candidates that we thought are pretty good, technically. Let's figure out where they best fit. And because we have 30 and there's 8 slots, then we can try to align that. I'm trying to see if I'm missing anything. The selection will be based on 15-minute interview rounds with 5 internal teams. Each team. Okay, and let me double check this. Extra info. Okay, if they're each team, this is the one thing that I don't know the detail of, so I'll try to cover both sides of this, but hear me out. I don't know if each team, there's 30 candidates, and if there's 5 teams of 8, that's 40 positions. It would mean automatically that people are all hired and they have open rooms. So I don't think that's the case. But if there's 5 teams, it's kind of weird. I don't know how many people per team. Like the math doesn't really math. So the reason I'm saying this is like I don't know if they're looking at, they couldn't be staffing these entire teams with like trainees, I guess. So maybe I'm kind of I'm overcomplicating this, but what the reason I was bringing that up is I was thinking perhaps the way that they're approaching this is that they have the teams are trying to figure out based on people's interests where they're going to align, and I think that is happening. But if there's 2 software engineers, 2 test engineers, 2 embedded and 2 extra, I don't know how. Like, is it one team that's going to have the 2 test engineers? Like, I don't know the split of how that's going to look. That's what's going through my head right now, and why I'm kind of struggling for some advice on the behavioral, or sorry, the part addition to the behavioral interview question. So, behavioral interview questions, probably something like a team fit. That's the part where I'm like, how's that going to look? And then on top of that, is this other part that's like be yourself kind of thing, because I think this is a good opportunity for people to kind of gauge, like, do we want to work with this person? And that has a lot of bias with it, which is unfortunate, but I think it's a thing that's kind of hard to not acknowledge. And I say that because if people are interviewing you and they just feel like it's going to be difficult to work with you from whatever they're picking up from the conversation, it will just automatically bias them towards other people that aren't making them feel that way. So I think when this person's saying, my current plan is just be myself, one of the reasons why I was saying I actually like that is that if you're trying so hard to present yourself in a different way, like it starts to feel unnatural, and then people kind of pick up on that and they're like, I don't know. But if someone's a lot more like comfortable, natural in how they're going through the interview, that probably feels better in this type of situation. Again, if they're parking that everyone has passed the technical bar, that's why I'm focused on these 3 things. So just to kind of rehash them, behavioral interview questions, probably something like a team fit that's going to say, like, based on your skills and interests, like where's a good fit here. I assume that also kind of lines up with like the role fit that they'll have available. And the third part, probably what seems like a smaller piece, but I don't want it to go ignored, is sort of like you being yourself. Like, are you going to be someone that people are, they're feeling like, yeah, I could work with this person. Okay, so just to wrap up that third point, I definitely would encourage you as much as possible to try going into this relaxed. I think you're in a great position if you've proven your technical skills, which is my assumption right now. So congrats on that. That's awesome. It's good to be in this second final round. Now I think it's about kind of nailing these other two parts. Um, the Let's start with the team fit, because again, I'm trying to think about this of myself being on the other end when it comes to like a team fit in terms of your interests. Like like I would hope at this point you understand what those teams are. I'm not sure, maybe they haven't told you, but I would hope that that's something that's happened. So if you have the opportunity, maybe do a little bit of digging into like what these teams are going to be working on. Maybe you don't know the like specific details because maybe it's internal or whatever, but maybe there's a team that's like, hey, we build internal tools, and there's a team that's like, hey, we're building the front end of stuff, and there's another team because I see embedded, they're like, we have some hardware product. Like think about those areas and then try to think about your strengths and interests and how they line up with those areas. Because I think ideally you want to try maximizing. I My guess, and this is an assumption. My guess is that you would hope, like you would be happy to take any of these, but you probably have a preference. So what I would not do is try to say like, like I only want to go for the software engineering role, and there's only 2 out of 8 positions. So if I get the feeling this one team over here only has a testing role, like I wouldn't sabotage that. I wouldn't be like, I don't really like testing. I'm not really interested in that. I would try to think about what each of these teams is doing and try to think about how your strengths tie into that. Now, I understand that if you have a preference, like you really want that to shine, but I wouldn't try to make something stand out as exceptional by making the rest of the stuff not look good or like not interested in testing. I'm not interested in embedded, right? So I say that because I'm just making the assumption you want to maximize your opportunity as much as possible. So let's think about this, right? If you were able to impress, there's 5 teams, you impressed 3 of them. There's going to be 3 people trying to compete to have you there. And I think that's a position you would much rather be in, personally, I think, than like, okay, like you kind of sabotage the testing one, you sabotage the embedded one, and only 1 out of the 5 teams was like kind of interested in you. But now they're interested in you, but they're also interested in like 10 other candidates out of the 30. So, like, I just think you want to maximize the surface area for success there. Um, because I don't know, maybe they're making the final decisions at that, or maybe they'll follow up with you and kind of give you an option between a couple teams. Like, hey, 2 of these 5 teams were interested. Like, do you have a first pick? I don't know. That might be overkill. Maybe they'll decide. What I'm trying to do is think about the only thing that I have recently, like 5 years ago, to kind of compare this to that's real, where I was on the other end, like going through sort of an interview process. I actually had this with Amazon. So when I was interviewing for Microsoft, Amazon, Google, in my Amazon interviews, I had 3 offers. And basically, and I'm as an engineering manager, my interviews are different, but I had 5 rounds, 4 or 5 interview rounds. Maybe it was only 4 at Amazon. And then they presented me with, they said, 3 teams want to offer to you. So then I did follow up interviews that sound very much like this. It wasn't 15 minutes, it was longer. But I met with the engineering managers of the team to go talk about like my interests. Now, the difference is that I had 3 offers. And this conversation that I was having with them was much more of a team fit, but they were trying to sell me on it. So what I'm thinking about is how would this be reversed? You're trying to sell that team on why you're a good fit there. And like I said, I think you want to try and maximize, the likelihood. So think about your skills, think about your interests, and think about what that team is likely looking for. I don't know how much data you have on that, but hopefully, given the time frame that you have here, I'm trying to see if you actually said. I don't see. I don't see when the interviews are, so hopefully I'm responding to this in time where you can you can leverage some of this information. But yeah, my thing would be like try to think about what these teams are going to be working on so that you can align yourself to that. Now, I'll spend the last little bit talking about behavioral interview questions because I still think you're going to get some of this. And even the team fit part, I would try to channel some behavioral interview stuff into this. So if you're getting asked behavioral interview questions, these are often things like, hey, like tell me about a time when you were, working on a project and something, right? Or you're working with a teammate and something. So they'll give you a brief scenario. Usually it's not like super complicated, but it might be something that feels tricky to answer. Sometimes these feel like they're a trap. Sometimes interviewers will do that. And you're like, tell me about a time where you had to resolve a conflict with a peer, and you're like, oh man, like this is a trap, like, because you got to be careful about how you're talking about your peer because obviously there was a conflict. You don't want to say they were a crappy person. So sometimes it feels like a trap, but the idea with these questions is number one, if they're asking about a scenario, you don't need like you have 15 minutes in this case. If you're getting a behavioral interview question, you don't need to go into the weeds of like all the technology and stuff you were using and talking about like these details about a product or service that like that's just really not the relevant point. In a behavioral interview question, they are trying to understand your behavior. Right? Kind of obvious when you stop and think about it. So the idea is like just enough context in terms of the technology or the technical situation, because that's not really the goal. The goal is you have to think about what the interviewer is trying to ask you, right? So tell me about a project that you were working on where you took the lead on it, right? And you demonstrated leadership on it. So what they don't want to hear is all of the details about the tech stack and like how, you know, specifically this product, like that's not the important part. It could be, the thing is, it could be any product. It could be any technology. That's sort of irrelevant to the question. They're just trying to say, give me a scenario, right? Tell me about an experience you had. And this is the thing that I want you to talk about, right? I want you to talk about leadership. So, how did you take the lead? What does that look like to you? Like, what characteristics are you thinking about when it comes to leadership, right? How did you take ownership of something? How did you take accountability? How did you try to drive progress? How did you, try to make sure people were rallying behind a common thing? Like, what did that look like on the project for you? Because if you're saying, yeah, I took leadership on this project and then your answer starts to be like, and we used C sharp because we're a C sharp shop. We really like using C sharp. It's performant, and we're familiar with a lot of the packages and stuff. So then we wanted to make sure that we were using ASP.NET Core for that, and then our backend was in Postgres, and then like it's not relevant. It just isn't. Unless they start to change the behavioral interview question to ask you about technology choices and stuff like that. But if they're not asking about it, like I would not spend time on it because you don't got much of it. So a bit of a tip there is like to think about if you're going down that rabbit hole of like, I know I'm going to talk about technology, like just steer away unless they're asking specifically about technology. And the reason, just to wrap that part up, I think a couple things here. I think as software developers, we love talking about technology. That's what we do. So I understand why people want to. And the other thing I think is that sometimes people, when they don't understand why people are asking behavioral interview questions, they're saying, "Oh, I'm thinking like about my resume. Like, what are all the things I can call out technology wise that are really going to make me stand out?" Like, they got your resume already. They know the stuff that's on there. They're trying to hear about these experiences. So just try to keep that in mind because I think that gets missed too easily. So my suggestion here is like I would, and I've kind of offered this advice before in different videos, but I would try to, um, if you can, make some time to go practice this kind of stuff. You can go look up example behavioral interview questions. You could literally go ask ChatGPT or whatever LLM you want. Like, give me 50 examples of behavioral interview questions that focus on different characteristics of, and you give it some context or whatever. You could say, I know, well, actually, I don't know. I don't know where you're interviewing for. I'm assuming it's not Amazon, but one example is like Amazon has leadership. What do they call them? Like their leadership principles or something. It's a big list of them. You could, if you were interviewing at Amazon, you could say, give me behavioral interview questions based on these. Give me 50 of them. Then, so you get your list however you'd like to, whether that's just researching online, using AI to generate them, and have it focused on different characteristics and experiences. Okay. Now you have your list. And what I recommend you do is try making sure number one, you understand for each of those questions what is being asked of me. I know it sounds like it's a trivial thing, but that's why I was saying I think sometimes people actually miss this. Try to make sure you understand what is the interviewer trying to understand from this question when they ask me it. So get that out of the way. And then the second part is try to see if you have different experiences that are highlights or challenges, like sort of like memorable experiences in your career or or school working on projects, whatever your experience is, and try to see if you can have some scenarios that you can talk through for each of them. Ideally, you have multiple scenarios you can refer to. I know I said 50 questions. You might be like, Nick, how am I going to come up with like, 50 to 100 different things here? I understand. I'm not, I'm just kind of throwing some numbers out there. But if you can have multiple scenarios that you could walk through per question, or at least for a couple of them, the reason I like that is because if you're like me, I blank out on stuff. And the worst would be like, I'm the kind of person that when I start blanking on something and I realize I'm screwing up, like it gets worse. Like I kind of spiral. And funny, just a bit of a tangent because I'm really good at tangents. One of the things that's helping with that is like these videos. So when I live stream on my main channel, when I make these videos, I don't edit these videos. Like if I mess up and I screw up my words or I have to wipe my face because it's itchy, if I'm making a normal YouTube video on my main channel, I'm like, oh, it's like, man, that sucks. Like I have to pay more for editing because it's just extra time. But when I do this kind of stuff, it just reminds me like, it doesn't matter like at all, right? And when I live stream, it's like I might mess up my words, or I've had live streams where like my monitor stopped working and I had to go use this monitor that's behind here and do the whole thing off centered. It felt like a disaster. And people are like, we just don't care. Like it doesn't actually matter. So that's something I'm using to work on this situation where like in an interview, if I'm like, oh, I can't remember this really good scenario, I know I have it. It's like when you can think about a word that's on the tip of your tongue and it doesn't come out. Um, I'm practicing in different ways to make this better so I can be more comfortable. But if you're like me, I would try to have a couple scenarios. That way, if you're like blanking on one, you have a backup that you can use and go through these, right? So practice going through your questions, practice your scenarios. You might get a question where you're like, oh man, like I know I had 50 questions in my practice and like I didn't see this one coming. But the reality is, you probably walk through a bunch of scenarios in your practice, and maybe there's something that stands out from one of those experiences you have where you could go relate it. I know when I was interviewing for big tech and practicing this stuff, I felt pretty lucky that feel like as an engineering manager, I had a lot of different experiences I could draw on. Like I had to focus less specifically on technology and more about experiences. And that was something that worked in my favor because when someone was like, tell me about a time when you had to resolve a conflict, I'm like, I have like 15 different experiences in the last month I could go tell you about. But I still practice them. I just had to spend less time practicing, which is really nice. So I think for a lot of software engineers, it's less common that that these things come to mind very fast. So definitely practice. So behavioral interview questions, that's what we just talked about. Team fit kind of stuff. So how you're going to talk about your strengths, your interests, and how that aligns specifically to what you believe that team is going to be working on. And the last part, which we talked about right at the start, was try to be yourself. Relax, right? You don't want to seem like you're not authentic. I know sometimes it's really challenging because interviewing is a skill, but I don't know if you can hear my cat meowing, but it's outrageous right now. So I'm going to wrap up the video. And yeah, I hope that's helpful. And I wish you the best of success in your interview rounds. You're almost there. Wishing you luck. And yeah, if you end up watching this and it was helpful and you get your job position, let us know. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.